Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, I am. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, I am. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, I am.
To this day.
Nino Brown Boxing, I'm back in a building, man. So, second part for this PBC podcast with Keith Thurman. It also got me thinking, man. Keith Thurman, he made a point in this podcast that Errol Spence needs to fight him. And he explains why. He said, despite his loss to Manny Pacquiao, Keith has beaten all of the top names that Errol has beaten. That being Danny Garcia and that being Sean Porter. Now, obviously, that doesn't include Mikey Garcia or Kell Brook, but it is what it is. With that being said, Keith has a point. And is that a fight that I would want to see? Absolutely. So after I made the last video I just uploaded, I decided to take a look at the welterweight rankings. And it's not looking too good for Keith. Keith was ranked 12th by the WBA, 3rd by the WBC. I don't believe he was ranked by the WBO or the IBF. And based off a lot of the names that I've seen in there, Keith should definitely be ranked. But that's up to Keith when it comes to that point. Now, the thing about this that is the most interesting, since Keith isn't ranked by the WBO, he's in a position where he would have to campaign to get a voluntary fight with Terence Crawford. Now, in this interview, he pretty much said the ship has sailed when it comes to making a fight with Terence. But a lot of the shit that he's saying kind of contradicts it when you know the fact that Errol Spence says he doesn't want to fight you. Now, Keith didn't say this, but it is a point that if Errol put it like this, Errol Spence and Keith Thurman are in very interesting positions. Errol Spence standing firm on not wanting to face Keith, and Keith seems that the ship has sailed with Terence Crawford, but he's not aggressively pushing for a Terence Crawford fight, or he's not showing that he's damn near desperate and he'll do whatever it takes to get a fight with Terence Crawford. It puts Keith in a lose-lose situation unless Errol Spence loses to Ugas, which most likely isn't going to happen. Now, Errol Spence, on the other hand, if he doesn't fight Keith and Errol doesn't give Sean a rematch because he showed that he's not interested in that, he faces Ugas next, great. That's only one fight for 2021. Now, Errol is in a position when it comes to welterweight. If Thurman isn't an option, you just beat Danny. Let's say hypothetically, you beat Ugas. You're not interested in Sean because you just beat him October 2019. At this point, the only options, because Manny Pacquiao's been ducking Errol, the only options is Keith Thurman or Terence Crawford. Now, my thing is, I'm interested in finding out which one is Errol Spence most likely willing to fold on first. Giving Terence Crawford a 50-50 split or giving Keith Thurman a fight. I don't know how deep the hate for Keith Thurman Errol Spence has, and only time will tell when it comes to that. But it's been a lot of interviews, a lot of videos where Errol Spence has expressed his disdain for Keith. And Errol Spence he's put it out there numerous times that he has zero interest in facing Keith Thurman at all. Keith Thurman was funny acting. He said Keith Thurman is fake. When Keith Thurman had the opportunity to give Errol his fight, he didn't. And then all of a sudden it was injury after injury after injury. And at this point, Errol Spence has officially washed his hands with Keith Thurman. And then we know the situation with Terence Crawford. Errol, he feels that Terence Crawford asking for 50-50 is absolutely ridiculous. And he doesn't have the numbers to back it. And that's just, it just doesn't make sense. The only difference between the two is Keith has zero leverage because there's nothing that Keith doesn't have anything that Errol wants. Crawford does have some leverage. Errol wants to become undisputed, and after he cleans up his side of the street, assuming he'll beat Ugas, it's only one piece of that puzzle left, and that's Terrence Crawford WBO belt. So me personally, I believe that the hate runs so deep for Keith Thurman. Errol Spence would give Terrence Crawford 50-50 before he even gave the in-house opponent of Keith Thurman a fight. That's just what I believe, based off of all the consistent shit that Errol has said about Keith Thurman. That's just the reasonable conclusion that I've come to. The reason I said it because I don't think it's an alternative. Unless Errol decides to go face Sean and give him a rematch, I don't see anything else left at welterweight unless Errol's going to start fighting these young guys. But then that's kind of irrelevant. Like Jerron Boots Ennis, you have Keith Thurman, you have Mikey Garcia, you have Sean Porter, you got a number of other guys in the welterweight division that aren't unified that should stand in the way of a Jerron Boots Ennis getting a shot at Errol Spence. So we'll see how that goes. But another thing, when it comes to the whole Errol Spence, Keith Thurman thing, is Keith Thurman is a smart guy. And Keith Thurman understands that even though Errol has a lot of leverage, he has a lot of notoriety, he has majority of the belts for the welterweight division, it's still a limit. It's an obstacle with making a bud fight, and it's still a certain amount, and Errol still has his goals. But even with that, what is Errol going to do? Move up to 154? He's not going to face Jamel Charlo, even though I feel like that would be one of the greatest fights that we can get in today's time. But we all know how that situation goes and the whole friendship thing. Nino Brown Boxing is not a fan of the friendships in boxing when it comes to people that are in and around your weight class. I don't like that shit. And that's one of my biggest gripes with Jamel, but it is what it is. And some people say, well, about time Errol moves up to 154, Jamel will be gone. How the fuck do you know that? We don't know, because last time I checked, Jamal is still at 160. I mean, it's the same shit, but it's actually, Jamel's twin brother. I don't think Jamel's going to move up when Jamal hasn't moved up. And Jamal had a perfect opportunity to make an announcement to move up or mention that he plans on moving up soon because he's been called out by David Benavidez at 168. Jamal said that he's a 160-pounder. He's at middleweight, so he's going to fight at middleweight, which means he's staying at middle. Jamel's staying at 154, and Errol, he has to make it do at 147. So unless the PBC gets involved and they forces Errol hand, then this shit is going to play out in a very interesting way. I mean, I'd rather for it to be completely different and these guys have more interest in facing each other instead of video after video and tweet after tweet of how Thurman is the ship has sailed on facing Crawford and Errol doesn't want to fight Thurman, and Errol and Charlo are never going to fight because they're friends, and Charlo saying that he'll never get Jamel Charlo saying that Andrew will never get a fight with him and his brother because of whatever. Like, all of this bullshit of I'm not going to fight, I'm tired of it. And that's why I don't really make a lot of videos anymore. But this Keith Thurman podcast is definitely interesting. I feel like they both are in a very interesting situation. And I'm very interested to see how this shit plays out. But only time will tell. The PBC has yet to announce their fight lineup for 2021. They're sprinkling fight announcements here and there, but nothing too major. We'll see how it goes. Nino Brown Boxing, and I'm out.